don't go anywhere. We got another discussion coming up here with a fantastic gentleman with whom I have spent some time in the past. He has just finished a very long stint in Iceland as the president for a very long time. He's been in government for a great deal of time, and he has given his life after his presidency to one of the issues that he finds the most important in the world, and that is the Earth, the climate. Obviously, coming from the Arctic Circle, he takes this particularly seriously as he has witnessed the effects of it firsthand. But he's not just talking about ice and wildlife. He's talking about the political implications and the societal and demographic implications of climate change. And he's done a great deal of work to try and, as I discussed with him yesterday, and I'll discuss with him a little bit more for a few minutes here, to try and come up with how we articulate what all of us with different views of the climate and the environment and the Earth, we all care about it, but maybe we all care about a different piece of it, or something motivates us particularly differently about climate change. How do we articulate a common vision so that we can pool our resources, our efforts, our political needs in a way that that sort of harnesses the crowd, that harnesses our efforts jointly, both as individuals, as institutions, as governments, and whomever we are, as earthlings, as David said earlier. So I want to introduce Ólafur Grímsson to join me here on the stage, and we can have this discussion a little more fully. Thank you. I hadn't thought about this. We're sitting quite far apart, but it's great to see you again.
Yeah, great to see you. Yeah.
You articulated this so well. First of all, you're holding, let's show the audience this. You are holding, that is the roadmap. That's what you call the roadmap. You almost described it to me as a sort of a common prayer for people who are worried about the world. Tell me a bit about the genesis of that and what that is.
Well, as the governments in the world were preparing for the first COP meeting following the success of Paris, some of us came together first in this city in October of last year and started discussing how can we make sure that Paris will be a success, that in fact it will not just be empty words, but it will help to save the climate. And we couldn't really look forward to COP22, COP23, COP24, COP25, and so on and so forth. So we brought together in Marrakesh on the sideline a group of about 100 thinkers, policymakers, innovators, entrepreneurs, and others to answer three fundamental aspects of this and to try to bring it down to one sheet of paper. And the first one was this, as partly came out in your previous discussion, that we now have in the second decade of the 21st century a new political model where, in fact, we can all execute global change. The old model, you need the governmental leadership, you need big corporations, you need huge international organizations and conferences, is kind of outdated. Of course, it can help if it is positive, but we are now empowered through information technology, transformations globally and socially, that each and every one of us can be a doer. And that's why we called the gathering a Do Fest, emphasizing that we, each and every one of us, have a responsibility. And the second element was this, that partly also described in your previous discussion, that in the last 10 or 15 years, there have been extraordinary innovations in the renewable clean energy area, which now means that we already have the tools. We don't have to wait for big breakthroughs. We already have the tools in our homes, in our villages, in our communities, in our companies, in our cities, in our towns, to transform the energy system in order to save the climate. Because quite frankly, the other side of Paris was that it was an energy conference. It was not a climate conference. Because if we don't have a comprehensive energy transformation, the climate will not be saved. So to some extent, it is misleading to call all this dialogue, all these conferences, all these marches, climate actions, because there have to be energy transformation, and each of us has the responsibility. But the third element was this. Every political movement that has succeeded in the world, every religion which has gained great followers, they've had a common text, a kind of a manifesto or a testament, simple, understandable by the farmers and the fishermen as well as the Pope and the high expert. But the climate movement didn't have such a text. So our tent was in Marrakesh to try to create on one sheet of paper what I've called the common prayer of the climate movement. A concrete, realistic text, but which is also emotional, also appeals to our heart as well as our mind and as well as our desire for action. And in a new language, because quite a lot of the climate dialogue is in a stale language. And the remarkable thing is we succeeded. And we created on one sheet of paper. I always prefer to have it on a sheet of paper instead of my iPhone or iPad, because you scroll on those instruments, you don't really realize it's just on one sheet of paper. And I encourage all of you to read it. And read it in a way you forget about what I said. Read it as if you are hearing about it for the first time. And then act on it. And on the basis of this, we then took it in early January to Abu Dhabi, to the World Future Energy Conference and the annual assembly of IRENA. We brought it here, as you know. A roadmap is part of those who brought this gathering here together. And in October, we will bring it to the largest annual gathering on the Arctic Circle Assembly in Iceland. So the connection of Marrakesh, Abu Dhabi, Washington, and Iceland, together with the driving forces in the Silicon Valley and Palo Alto, has been a big part of this, has hopefully created this short text, a kind of a realistic document that explains what we can do, but also will become a kind of a common prayer of the successful climate movement.
What do you think happens? I understand why that's necessary. What comes next? What do you feel happens?
Well, what will come next is that we will try to spread this message around. We will, through the website of roadmap.org, as we promise in the text, celebrate best practices, inform others of what is being done, but above all, invite each and every one of you or anyone anywhere in the world to share what they are doing, to inform others, and be a part of this movement. It's an attempt to use the modern information technology which has created a global community for all of us in order to hammer home the message that now each and every one of us has to be a doer and have to answer the question, what are we doing? And the hidden assumption of all of that, and I remind you, that was kind of before a new administration actually took power in this country, the hidden assumption was that we will not let an election in one country or a government in another country or a leader in the third country stall our progress and prevent success.
And somebody...
And the other side of that coin for the activists in the climate movement, that the election of somebody who is against what we are trying to do is not an acceptable excuse for not being active ourselves and not executing this change ourselves. Because the essence of the roadmap is to explain in concrete terms that we now, all of us, have the tools to actually together, irrespective of the government, execute this change.
And as somebody who's been a politician for a long time, you believe in the concept of making this feel like a movement. For those people who think it's just a complaint or they're pessimistic about the environment, you're saying it's a movement.
Well, I think that actually is the strength of my argument, because I have spent almost, apart from being a professor in the early years of my life, most of my life in elected public office, as a member of parliament, as a minister of finance, and as a president for 20 years. I hesitate to say it because it's a long time. It might sound undemocratic. But it's therefore a bit paradoxical, but I also think realistic, as somebody with that experience and that life behind me now advocates that these governmental institutions, although they might be helpful, are no longer necessary. And therefore, we now have the possibility to create movements from the ground up in our homes and communities and villages and different regions. And information technology and the new way of globally communicating, and we see it here today, how people are brought together, has given us the same kind of tools to do this, like the railways 200 years ago allowed political movements to come about in Europe, because through the railways you could spread newspapers every day and the political message. And now the radio created in the early part of the 20th century a new ground for political movements. So therefore, despite having spent my life in these governmental offices, I now say from my concrete experience, and I first realized this perhaps during the financial crisis in 2008 and what happened to my country, that now fundamental change can come from anywhere. Can come from unknown group of housewives who gather together, or a few young students who create a change, or a group of activists, or a leading company, as you saw here, or even Goldman Sachs of all places. And actually transform the world in this way. And the roadmap on a single sheet of paper in a common prayer of this movement is saying it's also our moral responsibility. It's also our moral responsibility for each and every one of us. And it poses that with a new language, which hopefully will be a basis of not only bringing people together, but also making the optimism realistic. That's why I think the title of this Earth Summit is so fantastic. Because quite frankly, there is a lot that we can be optimistic about. If we look at the transformation in clean energy all over the world, if we look at what's happening in China, for example, which I know very well in the terms of clean energy, if you know what's being done many different places all over the United States, and if you see the power of bringing people together in a new way, I have concluded that because of the optimism, I'm spending my effort and my forces in my post-presidential life to try to help to bring that about, not from the above, but in joining people at the ground level in different parts of the world.
Well, I always enjoyed our conversation when you were president, and we honor you for taking the time that you've now got after office to change the world for the better. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
It's roadmap.org.
Thank you. Thank you very much.